Today we're going to think about ancient Greece. When most people think of ancient Greece, they think of stories of heroes and gods, philosophy, mathematics, and of course the Olympic Games. All of these are wonderful ancient Greek achievements. However, it is important that we first realise that though there were Greeks, there was no such thing as ancient Greece. Hang on a minute, I'm sure you're thinking. Of course there's such thing as ancient Greece. That's what we're here to learn about. Let me explain. Modern Greece is a modern country with a flag, a rich history, and proud traditions. Modern Greece is a unified country with modern international borders. But in ancient times, what is now Greece was split into many so-called city-states, each with its own principal or capital city. Even the word Greece and Greek isn't Greek. The word Greece comes from the Latin, the Roman word Graecia. The ancient Greeks called Greece as a whole Hellas, and themselves Hellenes. These Hellenes, or ancient Greeks, lived in a part of the world which was mountainous by land and dotted with islands across the Aegean Sea. The mountains meant that travel and communication by land was very difficult, but a long coastline with many inlets made travel by sea much easier. And so the different Greek communities became accustomed to travelling by sea. From the Aegean, they spread out across the Mediterranean. They sought opportunities for trade and land, but were also driven by their curiosity. So to these peoples, the sea was crucial. Wherever they set up a new colony, they were rarely more than 50 miles from the sea. As the philosopher Plato once said, the ancient Greeks lived as frogs around a pond. At home, the Greeks found their climate was arid, and there was a scarcity of land to plant crops. So for the most part, they grew olives and grapes. This was another reason to explore, to find new lands to farm. But as far as they travelled, they never forgot their home city-state, their polis. Emerging around the 8th century BC, a polis is a self-governing city-state. Each polis was comprised of an urban centre with the surrounding countryside. Athens, for example, was surrounded by Attica. Sparta was surrounded by Laconia. City-states were populated by different categories of people. Citizens, always men, their female relations, slaves, and foreigners. Citizenship depended on where you and your parents had been born. A Greek's polis was crucial to his identity. For example, a Spartan was a Spartan first and a Greek second. All citizens were expected to participate in public life and would be called on to fight for their city. To be banished or outcast from your polis was a terrible fate. Here we see a broken piece of pottery called an ostrakon, with the name of the Athenian statesman Aristides written upon it. Each citizen voted with a sherd, with an ostrakon, whether or not to banish him. This is where we get the term ostracized from. However, we must remember each city-state was distinct, with different systems of government, different dialects, different customs, and different cultural norms. There were very strong rivalries. So the city-states were all Greek, but all different. Greek historian Herodotus described the relationship between the Greeks as one of common blood, common language, common shrines of the gods, and sacrifices, and similar customs. For example, they shared pan-Hellenic, or for all Greeks, sanctuaries and temples, such as Olympia, the home of Zeus, and Delphi, the home of Apollo. At the same time, though, they held fierce rivalries, constantly competed with each other, and even fought in wars against one another. But as much as the Greeks were in constant competition with each other, they had a unified sense of other people, foreigners, barbarians, literally the opposite of a citizen, someone who looked, acted and spoke differently, not Greek. This was most famously demonstrated during the Persian Wars. What seemed like a countryside filled with disparate and arguing city-states unified against the Persians in several key battles at Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. However, after the threat from the outsiders had been vanquished, the city-states went back to fighting each other. Between 431 and 404 BC, for example, Athens and Sparta were very much at war. When they weren't fighting, a focus for inter-polis competition was the Olympic Games. First held in 776 BC, the competition was repeated every 4 years. This period of time was called an Olympiad. There were fewer events than a modern Olympics, but they included running, boxing, wrestling, chariot racing, long jump, javelin, and discus. Only free-born Greeks could compete. And over the course of the competition, the sheer number of sweaty competitors and male spectators sitting in the heat of the day, all without proper sanitation, meant that things got a little smelly. Indeed, it was joked that if you really wanted to punish your slave, you should send them to the Olympic Games. But the competitions were important for building bonds and of course establishing who was best. And impressive statues, such as to the goddess of victory, Nike, were erected so none would forget great victories. Indeed, when not competing with each other in wars or athletics, the Greeks competed in building temples and other monuments, as well as in making grand dedications which were stored in specially constructed treasuries. So, in this video, we have learned that there's really technically no such place as ancient Greece. The Greeks actually lived in a series of city-states. They engaged in fierce rivalries, wars, and constant competition. All of this is despite the fact that they were also united by a series of cultural similarities and a pantheon of shared gods. This is the central paradox of the Hellenes, of the ancient Greeks.